for us to offer to brands, we would love.
Yeah, that's what we'd like to do. And well, I guess I'll walk through some of this stuff. So I'm from Alcatel-Lucent. We're megacorp, we're the man, and it gets us down as much as it does you. But what's really cool about these guys, well, historically they used to do, that. And the funny part is, our marketing folks, this is the diagram they give us to tell us how to do clear, concise, legible network diagrams. This is what's supposed to be simple, right? So yeah, sure it is. But the cool thing is, Alcatel-Lucent went out and found a bunch of folks that weren't telco. They say, you guys don't know telco, you haven't been corrupted, you haven't been deceived by the world of telcos. Like John and I come from SourceForge and Slashdot. We've got another few guys. One was CollabNet, JasperSoft. John was at SourTech. A lot of open source, a lot of just kind of nitty-gritty in the trenches dev type work, right? And so they kind of brought us in and they said, go start some fights. They said, make people angry, make them start rethinking how they do business, because the telecom world is no longer the world of a monopoly, and they can't afford to continue to operate as if it is. And that's the big problem with how things are running right now with all of the big telcos, is they still pretend like it's a monopoly, right? They feel like they can just plod along at their glacial pace, do what is in their best interests, and not really think about developers. Now, a lot of them are starting to realize that the long tail, especially of developers, is what's going to be important, what's going to get them where they need to go, and so they're trying to engage, but they're clumsy at it, right? Because they don't know. They're working on a lot of times the assumptions of what 1995 had to offer, and this isn't individuals I'm finding, because I'll go to talk to AT&T or I'll go talk to Sprint, and the individuals that you talk to, especially the engineers that actually make it happen, they're really savvy. They know. They're like, oh, this is absolutely what we need to do. We need to engage these developers. We need to give them some of these cool network tools that nobody knows exist. It's just hard to get out of your own way. And that's the same thing for us at Alcatel-Lucent. It's hard for us to get out of our own way. And so that's why they brought a bunch of folks in who could be a disruptive influence and kind of hopefully bridge that gap a little bit, right? Now, yeah, and here we are. We're trying to bring the networks to you guys and the rest of the long tail. So that's our whole purpose, right? And it's a cool proposition, right? And it's a matter of whether we can kind of pry these tools out of the network's hands, because there's some really awesome tools that exist in these networks that nobody else has, right? Network-based location, you think about, well, I've got an iPhone in my pocket. Everybody's got an Android, these days, and it seems like what's the use for network-based location when I've got a GPS device in my pocket? Well, turns out there's a lot of really cool edge cases. And then if you, like a lot of you developers, are going after emerging markets, right? There's huge money to be made in these emerging markets. And unfortunately, the emerging markets don't have a lot of these smartphones. They're mostly feature phones still. So network location specifically is a great edge case because it can work no matter what kind of phone you have, whether it's a feature phone or a smartphone. But even if you have a smartphone, network location has been really cool to kind of mash up with GPS to kind of augment it. If I'm working in the basement of my office building, then and I want to get a location, or I want to do something that requires location-based services, my GPS device isn't going to work so well, and unfortunately, network, Wi-Fi location still has a long way to go. So the network location can help augment that. And what's more, we're actually seeing a couple of companies. One in particular, Georgia Tech, the university in the States, is actually working on a solution where they're taking augmented reality apps. What they're trying to do is use more than just the GPS or more than just network location. You're trying to mash it together to give you more of a fine point of exactly where I am, so that they can use that overlay technology. So you can actually hold your iPhone up and look around the room, and you can see relevant items flagged on your camera in real time. But there's all kinds of other stuff, right? Because the networks know a lot more about the subscribers than you do. They know their preferences. They know their there's all kinds of really cool tools that you can leverage that the network has to offer that may not be available as easily over the top. And unfortunately, it's just a matter of kind of excavating that and making it available. Now, those are all cool, but unfortunately, this is really hard. And really hard because if you go to a room and there's a whole bunch of developers in the room, the guy from the network is typically this awkward guy in the suit over here that's kind of bumming everybody out, right? And it's not that one or the other is better or worse, it's just that they speak two completely different languages, I've found, and it's really hard to kind of translate, right? Because when developers go to work with the network, they see this, right? And it's hard because, you know, the networks really are interested. They really care about, we want to engage developers. They don't know how to tell them about the value proposition in a way that gets developers excited, you know, because they see, oh yeah, there's all these tools, let's go, okay, let's go. I just want to work with them, I want to build some stuff. A great example was someone I heard earlier talking about bus schedules, right? I want to write an app, and I want to include the relevant bus schedules for my area for this app, and mash it up with a few other things. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these, you know, public transportation, they're government run, so here's another problem. You throw in governments, it's the same problem, right? He wanted to get a hold of these bus schedules, they wouldn't give him the bus schedules. And what's more, they found out that he was scraping the RSS feed to get the bus schedules, and they took down the RSS feed because they didn't know how to let that information go and kind of relinquish a little bit of control for the improvement of the community. So it's really hard when we hear one thing and then the actions in our eyes are very different when we see these telcos doing these things that we just don't understand because, you know, it's a fundamental lack of understanding of how they do what they do and why. On the other side now, the networks, when they interact with developers, kind of see this, right? They see a bunch of spoiled little children that are stomping their feet and saying, I want this, and you need to give it to me, without any thought towards, okay, how is this going to make money? What's the business case? Why should the networks expend it? You know, because the networks are in a really bad way in their eyes, right? Because historically they've had really good profit margins and they've been able to do certain things that have kind of maintained the good order and discipline as far as the networks go. And that world is changing. It's really kind of unsettling for the networks. And they're seeing a shift in kind of how the monetization of the world goes. And unfortunately, they just got done expending huge amounts of money in most cases for things like 3G, and already we're at 4G and LTE. So they're looking to either AT&T in the States is a great example. I'm sure everyone's heard about how terrible AT&T's network is, but you know that's mostly because the networks operate on a very different time schedule, right? Because they have massive amounts of infrastructure that they have to think about, and they have to, you know, allot so much money per year for the expansion and improvement of the network. And so they were operating on a certain set of assumptions, and then this smartphone explosion kind of just blew their timetable 5-10 years down the road, and they're really struggling to keep up. Unfortunately, that means to keep their profit margins where they're comfortable to, you know, maintain the business and make sure that they can keep people employed. Unfortunately, that means now they're having to reevaluate, oh my God, we have all this stuff that we have to fix this network, but we also want to roll out the new network that has a new capability. So they're in a really tough spot, and a lot of times we as developers just don't think about that. We're all too happy to say, your network is terrible, I can't wait until the iPhone is on Verizon so I can leave you jerks behind. And that's most of the cases, that's just not the case. So unfortunately, that means that no one can really unravel how to interact. That's one thing that we're hoping to kind of change, right? Especially with our open API service. Each of these telcos has a very different language that they like to interact with people. You know, if I want to interact with the network, and this is something that you were saying earlier, was just that it's really hard to unravel how to interact with the network, especially because every time you go to, you know, an AT&T or a Sprint, they have a different language they want you to interact with, right? They haven't modernized and kind of rolled their APIs into something that's human legible. It's still working on, you know, the IMS or the Parlay or the Parlay X, or, you know, ancient protocols that, oh my God, no one knows. How are we supposed to interact with this? Well, That's what we're trying to change. We're trying to take all of this telco stuff that we're used to, right? Alcatel-Lucent has been doing business with carriers as their primary customers for a long, long time. We sell the hardware, the boxes. We have whole divisions of people that do that and understand that language. So now we're saying, okay, as long as you're doing that, let's wrap these APIs in REST calls so that the rest of the world can interact with them without huge amounts of headaches and whatnot. And we can be that link and provide the developer-facing stuff and kind of deal with all the headaches that we already have to deal with anyways. But I mean, even with REST, unfortunately, if you wanted to deal with each individual carrier every time you want to do something, you know, I have an app. If I'm in San Francisco and I have an app and I want to, you know, send push notifications to 3 different people, well, there's a good chance they're going to be on 3 different networks. And so I'm going to have to figure out different ways of pushing to their devices. And there's a lot of things to take into account, especially if I have 2 of those networks that I know how to deal with, and the 3rd is a complete black box and I haven't worked with them yet. So who wants to work with hundreds and hundreds of networks? Well, that's the other piece of what we're doing. We want to provide this unified network API so that, you know, like I said, we can interact with these folks on the back end because that's what we're used to doing. And then there's one API in front. Like if I want to have a location-based service, you can pull a location-based service with a phone number and we'll know, okay, well that guy goes to Sprint, so we route the call over here to Sprint, and then we send back the result in a standardized format. So. But unfortunately, no matter what carrier you talk about, what big business you talk about, when it comes to, you know, best example I heard was 2 Freds in a shed, right? You talk about 2 Freds in a shed and they're gonna move a hell of a lot faster than an 80,000 person multinational global megacorp, right? So it's really hard to take 2 Freds in a shed and put them together with the megacorp and get any kind of results within a meaningful amount of time. Mostly because megacorp will say, well, that's great, I'm glad you guys are excited, but that doesn't affect my P&L whatsoever. So that's where you guys come in, right? The more folks that we can get that even if they're not using it, you know, you don't have to use these things right away, but we just have to let the carriers know that we want to use this stuff. We want this stuff. Open up, become players in this open ecosystem. Don't be so closed. If we actually get enough momentum, then these guys will start falling like dominoes, right? And that's important, right? They need to hear that developers are interested in the tools that can make you succeed. They haven't heard it said the right way, I guess. A lot of them know that, hey, we have to engage with developers, but why? What are they interested in? Like we have, you know, 100 different APIs that we can expose. Which one's important? You know, in a lot of cases, they'll come to me and they'll say, look, we have all these APIs. We have the resources to expose 3 of them, maybe 5 of them. So it's important for them to know what's important, what's a priority, right? Because in a lot of cases, when they expose these APIs, you go and look at AT&T's Developer Zone or Verizon or Sprint's Developer Conference, and they're talking about, hey, these are the next 5 APIs that are going to change the world. And you know, and they look out at the crowd, and it's just a bunch of blank faces, or you know, people are dozing off in the aisles because you know what? Those are things I can get on my Android SDK that already, right? They don't provide any discernible improvement, but there's other things that are in the network that we can't get anywhere else. So they need to be able to understand which of those things is going to be most powerful, and the only way they're going to know is, you know, for people to come and say, this is what I want. I want to work with you. I'm interested. I'll play around with a few things. I'll give you some feedback. And the more of that feedback they get creates a really good feedback loop. And then the carriers are actually able to take it and do important things on the back end so that it can actually get out to us in a reasonable amount of time.